The National Student Financial Aid Scheme will have an extra 32.6 billion rand to give students. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced this during his budget speech yesterday. But will this be anywhere enough to address the financial challenges facing struggling students? Well, the Secretary-General of Student Organisation SASCO, Butinani Tubela, joins me now virtually from here in Johannesburg just to discuss some of the points coming out of the budget, specifically that amount of money. Butinani, thank you so much for your time this evening. This was discussed on our show last night as well. 32.6 billion rand is not a small amount of money, but it is separate from the ongoing issues around debt that so many of our students are struggling with. To start with, though, your reaction to that extra boost being given to the coffers pertaining to Nsfas.
Well, thanks, Masa. We must say that we, as the South African Students' Congress, we do welcome the injection of the 32 billion over the period of 3 years. But we must say that we welcome it with caution that one will have to monitor how it's spent, but secondly, as you would know that there was a 18 million budget cut in the previous year from the Nsfas, which was a shortfall. So we welcome this particularly because of that, because we think this intervention actually deals with that shortfall we've been toying for in terms of the budget cuts, which would have seen Nsfas not being able to fund the first years, also be having problems in terms of funding full scale of the returning students. So we're quite excited, but of course we're excited with caution.
And now, like we said, focus there on first-year students and current bursary holders, but it feels like an even bigger number of students that are struggling to pay back their debt in terms of fees. And we all know that that affects them being able to register for further studying, and of course, it prevents them from being able to get access to their diplomas, to their certificates, so they can go out there and apply for jobs that they so desperately needs at the moment. Where is your organisation at with regards to how we can help these students that are drowning in debt?
Well, I think as the South African Students' Congress, we've been clear that we need a clear debt audit of the student debt in South Africa, and we need to move to clear the debt in South Africa at least in 3 stages from our proposal. That you would need first to clear the debt of the TEFSA generation, and then you move to clear the debt of the Nsfas generation, that is from the period of Nsfas being incepted to the period where Nsfas was actually declared as a full bursary, which is 2017. Why do we say that we need to clear the debt? Is because you have had, take myself, Masa, I've not, I'm owing around about 150,000 for my academic fees, because I've never been an Nsfas bursary because my mother was a teacher. But we then say my mother, who has never in her entire life had such a debt. So that is why we strongly feel that there is a need to bring the private sector, bring government, and say we need to audit the student historic debt in South Africa, because you would remember every year, beginning of the year, we have 3 issues that are actually a contributing factor to the protests that we have seen. One being the historic debt, which prevents some of us from registering for the following year to proceed with our education because of the debt, such that students now currently, those who are the so-called missing middle, are currently signing what is called an acknowledgement of debt form, just to allow you to register. But you acknowledging a debt that you are unable to pay is actually not progressive. In our understanding is that this money is only going to benefit those who are already Nsfas beneficiaries, which are coming from your indigenous families, who are coming from the working class background families. But we are clear, we've said to the minister that we need to make a plan, one, to address the so-called missing middle. And how do we do that? Is by increasing the Nsfas cap to be in reality with, one, the country's inflation rate, but also with the country's living lifestyle of living, because it was declared in 2018, which is 5 years ago, that Nsfas threshold is now 250, but the cost of living has grown from 2018 to 2022 so drastically, such that we even had a COVID that affected the cost of living in South Africa. And that is why even now you have more people who qualify for Nsfas than you would have had in the past, because most people have lost their jobs. That is why we then, therefore, in addressing the student debt, we also need to increase the Nsfas cap from 350 to 600. But we do need, because it's part of the accounting provisions, to write off the historic debt in South Africa. But of course, we need accurate auditing of the historic debt, and we know how much are we writing off and how many people are we giving a new chance to be able to own property, to be able to rent and so on.
Butanani, if I could actually just come in there, and perhaps almost politics aside, you admitted there that this is the amount of debt that you're sitting with. You said about 150,000 rand, and you didn't qualify for Nsfas because your mother is a teacher. But you and I both know the average teacher in South Africa does not make a lot of money, and the average university education is extremely expensive. If you don't mind sharing with us personally, what kind of pressure has that put on your family? Because obviously the family is very proud that you were able to go and study. Your mum's a teacher, so education has always been extremely important in terms of access and being able to change your life going forward. But starting out with that kind of debt hanging over you, you're saying this is the first time your mum has ever had that kind of debt hanging over her head. It must make things so very difficult.
Well, I think if you give yourself time, I've learned to understand that there is something called a garnishing order at an early age. Because, I mean, if my mother had not been, because remember, for my mother not being able to have me being part of Nsfas because of her salary, has then meant that she must then go to the banks to get me a study loan. And obviously, I am not alone at home. We're three. And then besides being three, you have relatives that also rely on her. And my mother is a single parent, unfortunately. So we had to make means to ensure that we survive. And obviously, with the student loan from a bank, you default, you get garnishing orders, you get blacklisted, and all of those kind of things. So indeed, it has quite not been an easy journey. I can tell you now that she doesn't own a car. Not that she doesn't want it, but because it's the conditions. I mean, my siblings, both of them who come after me are over 18, and we had to make ways to ensure that they also get into the system, were able to survive the system and be able at least to say, we are graduates. As graduates, we are able to assist her to meet her dreams. Because that is a reality of a black child in South Africa, is that they have to postpone their dreams in order to ensure that the sustainability and survival at home. So that is why when we speak and we...
Sorry, Butanani, we are running out of time, but indeed it drives the work that you and your colleagues at SASCO do on a day-to-day basis, because you can relate to so much of what your members and other students are going through on the daily. And we thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for sharing that more personal story with us this evening. SASCO Secretary General Butanani Tobela joining us there from here in Johannesburg.